What if a reclusive millionaire, his heart encased in ice from a decade-old betrayal, found his perfectly ordered world shattered by a chance encounter in the grittiest part of town, all because his multi-million-dollar Lamborghini chose that exact spot to break down, leading him to a grimy little boy whose innocent gesture would unearth a secret that could either destroy him or offer the one thing his money could never buy: redemption. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Arthur Blackwood, a name synonymous with ruthless success and impenetrable solitude, scowled as his gleaming, obsidian Lamborghini Aventador, a creature of raw power and meticulous engineering, coughed, sputtered, and then died with an undignified sigh. He was miles from his sterile penthouse, stranded in a neighborhood that time, and certainly city maintenance, had forgotten. The air, thick with the smell of stale grease and damp concrete, was an assault on his senses, so different from the filtered, climate-controlled environments he inhabited. He thumped the steering wheel, a rare show of outward frustration. His schedule was sacrosanct, his time measured in transactions worth more than this entire dilapidated block. A tow truck would take ages. He unbuttoned his bespoke suit jacket, the fine Italian wool suddenly feeling constricting. Children's laughter, sharp and carefree, drifted from a nearby alley, a sound so alien to his current life it was almost jarring. He was considering his options, none of them palatable, when a small shadow detached itself from a crumbling doorway. A boy, no older than 8 or 9, with smudges of dirt on his cheeks and clothes that had seen far better days, approached the supercar with wide, curious eyes. He was tiny, almost bird-like, yet there was an unnerving stillness about him. "Engine trouble, mister?" the boy asked, his voice surprisingly clear and steady, devoid of the usual awe Arthur's vehicles inspired. Arthur, normally intolerant of interruptions, especially from strangers in such insalubrious settings, found himself too exasperated to be immediately dismissive. "Something like that," he grunted, already reaching for his secure phone to call his head of security, Marcus, for an extraction. The boy circled the rear of the Lamborghini, his gaze intense. "Sometimes it's just a loose connection. My mom's old car does that, the big red cable thingy." He gestured vaguely. Arthur almost scoffed. A street urchin diagnosing his Aventador? Preposterous. Yet he paused. There was an odd, almost clinical interest in the boy's eyes, not just childish fascination. The boy peered under the engine cover, which Arthur had managed to open. "Can I look?" he asked, not waiting for an answer as he ducked closer, his small, nimble fingers surprisingly gentle as he pointed. "That one there, see? It looks a bit wobbly." Arthur, despite himself, leaned in. He knew next to nothing about car mechanics beyond turning the key and pressing the accelerator. The boy, with an odd confidence, reached out a small, grimy hand towards a thick, insulated cable. As his sleeve pulled back, something glinted on a thin, worn leather cord around his neck, tucked beneath his t-shirt. The boy jiggled the cable he'd indicated. "Sometimes you just gotta make sure it's snug." Arthur wasn't looking at the cable. His eyes were fixed on the object the boy's movement had briefly dislodged from under his shirt. It was a ring, a very specific, unique ring, a band of white gold, intricately carved with a miniature stylized phoenix, its wings unfurled as if in mid-flight. A ring Arthur himself had designed, had commissioned, had placed on the finger of the only woman he had ever truly loved, Eliza, a decade ago, before she had vanished from his life, leaving a wound that had never healed, only festered into a cold, hard cynicism. His breath caught in his throat. His heart, a dormant organ he'd thought long dead to feeling, hammered against his ribs with a force that stole his voice. The world tilted. The stench of the street, the boy's voice, the dead Lamborghini, it all faded into a roaring silence, pierced only by the impossible sight of that ring. The exact ring. "Where?" Arthur managed, his voice a raw, unfamiliar rasp. "Where did you get that ring, boy?" The child looked up, startled by the sudden intensity in the millionaire's voice, his innocent blue eyes, so strikingly familiar, blinking up at the tall, imposing man. The boy, whose name Arthur would soon learn was Leo, touched the ring resting against his collarbone. "It was my mom's," he said, his voice soft but clear. "She said it's her most precious thing. She lets me wear it for luck sometimes, especially when things are tough." His gaze was unwavering, a startlingly direct look from such a young child. Arthur felt a tremor pass through him, an earthquake shaking the foundations of his carefully constructed, emotionless world. Eliza's most precious thing. His ring, worn by this child. He fumbled for his wallet, his movements jerky. You helped me. Let me give you something for your trouble." He pulled out a thick wad of notes, more money than the boy had likely ever seen. Leo shook his head, a small, polite gesture. "No, thank you, mister. My mom says we should help people if we can, not 'cause of what we can get." The simple dignity in the boy's refusal was a quiet rebuke to Arthur's entire way of life, where everything had a price, a transaction. Arthur stared at him, the money still clutched in his hand, feeling an unfamiliar mix of shame and a burgeoning, terrifying hope. He managed a stiff nod. "Right. Well, thank you then." He got back into the Lamborghini, the engine still stubbornly silent. The boy gave a small, almost sympathetic smile and darted back towards the shadowed alley from which he'd emerged. Arthur watched him go, the image of the phoenix ring burning behind his eyelids. He finally made the call to Marcus, his voice strained. "Marcus, my car has broken down on Almont Street. And Marcus, I need you to find out everything you can about a boy, about 8 years old, lives around here. He wears a distinctive ring on a cord, a phoenix, and his mother." The drive back to his penthouse, once Marcus and a tow truck had arrived, was a blur. The usual calm and order of his luxurious apartment felt oppressive, alien. He paced the vast expanse of his living room, the panoramic city lights a glittering, indifferent backdrop to his inner turmoil. Eliza, after all these years. Could it be? The ring was irrefutable, and the boy. There was something in his eyes, a shade of blue, a certain set to his jaw that pricked at Arthur's memory. He poured himself a brandy, the expensive liquid doing nothing to soothe the frantic thrumming in his veins. Flashbacks, sharp and painful, assailed him. Eliza's laughter, the warmth of her hand in his, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. And then the silence, the abrupt, inexplicable end. He'd been told she left, that she wanted nothing more to do with him or his world. His family, particularly his sister Victoria, had been quick to reinforce that narrative, to paint Eliza as unsuitable, fleeting. He'd believed them, or perhaps, in his youthful arrogance and hurt, he'd wanted to. It had been easier to build walls of bitterness than to face the desolation of her absence. The next morning, Marcus entered Arthur's study, his expression carefully neutral. "Sir, I have the information you requested. The boy's name is Leo Hayes. He is 9 years old. He lives with his mother, Eliza Hayes, at number 14, Almont Street, apartment 3B. Eliza Hayes. The name, spoken aloud after a decade, was like a physical blow, knocking the air from Arthur's lungs. It was her. It had to be. The hope, so tentative before, now surged, wild and terrifying. A son. Could Leo be his son? The timeline matched. The ring was the proof he hadn't dared to seek. He looked at Marcus, his face a mask of stone, betraying none of the chaos within. "Prepare the car, Marcus. We're going to Almont Street." As they drove, The cityscape transformed from gleaming towers to decaying tenements, a mirror of Arthur's own journey from cold certainty to terrifying unknown. A storm of emotions, dread, anticipation, a desperate, aching need for answers, brewed within him, threatening to capsize the carefully controlled vessel of his life. The car, a discreet but still undeniably luxurious sedan, pulled up a short distance from the dilapidated apartment block Marcus had indicated. Number 14, Almont Street. It looked even more wretched up close than Arthur remembered from his brief, jarring visit the previous day. Peeling paint, boarded-up windows on the ground floor, the pervasive smell of neglect. Arthur felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was where Eliza lived? His Eliza? He saw Leo first, kicking a battered soccer ball against a crumbling wall, his small figure a beacon of resilient energy in the grim surroundings. The boy looked up as Arthur approached, a flicker of recognition in his bright eyes. "Hi, mister. Is your car fixed?" Before Arthur could respond, a woman emerged from the shadowy doorway of the building, wiping her hands on a faded apron. Her hair, once a vibrant chestnut, was duller now, pulled back tiredly, but the fine bone structure of her face, the curve of her lips, were achingly familiar. Time had etched lines of worry around her eyes and mouth, but it was her, Eliza. She stopped dead when she saw him, her hand flying to her mouth. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale and shocked. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the street, distant sirens, children shouting, fading into a muted backdrop. It was as if a chasm of 10 silent years had opened between them, an abyss filled with unspoken words and unhealed wounds. Leo, sensing the sudden tension, looked from his mother to Arthur and back again, his playfulness evaporating. "Mum, do you know this mister?" Eliza's voice, when she finally found it, was a fragile whisper. "Arthur, what are you doing here?" Arthur's gaze was fixed on her, taking in the changes, the hardship etched into her beloved features. The guilt was a physical ache in his chest. "Eliza," he said, his own voice hoarse, I saw the ring, the one Leo was wearing." Eliza's eyes darted to Leo, then back to Arthur, a hunted look dawning. She instinctively drew Leo closer to her side. "It was mine," she confirmed, her voice barely audible. "You gave it to me." "And Leo?" Arthur pressed, his heart hammering. He had to know, had to hear it from her. Is he my son?" Eliza's composure, already so frail, seemed to crumble. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling onto her cheeks. She nodded, a small, defeated movement. "Yes, Arthur, Leo is your son." The world tilted again for Arthur, his son, a living, breathing piece of him, a testament to a love he'd thought buried and lost. He felt an overwhelming surge of emotions, joy, regret, anger, and a profound, bone-deep sorrow for the lost years. "Why, Eliza? Why didn't you tell me? I looked for you. His voice trailed off, the accusation dying on his lips as he saw the raw pain in her eyes. "I tried," she said, her voice trembling, laced with a decade of bitterness and hurt. "I called. I wrote. I even came to your office building. But I was always turned away. My letters were returned unopened. I was told you wanted nothing to do with me, or any child." Her words hung in the stale air, heavy with implication. Told by whom? The easy narrative of her abandonment, the one he had clung to, shattered into a million pieces, revealing a much uglier, more painful possibility. Someone had deliberately kept them apart. Arthur reeled from Eliza's words as if struck. "Told I wanted nothing to do with you, or a child?" The phrase echoed in his mind, a chilling counterpoint to the narrative he'd been fed for a decade. He spent a sleepless night in his sterile penthouse, the city lights mocking his inner darkness. Each star in the vast expanse seemed to represent a lost moment with his son, a lost conversation with Eliza. The image of Victoria, his older sister, floated to the surface of his memory. Ambitious, controlling, with a disdain for anyone she deemed outside their rarefied social strata. Eliza, with her gentle nature and artistic spirit, had been the antithesis of everything Victoria valued in a potential sister-in-law. Victoria had managed many of his personal affairs back then, a responsibility she'd seized with an unnerving efficiency. A cold, sickening suspicion began to crystallize in Arthur's mind. Could she have been the one, the architect of his desolation? The next day, Arthur found himself drawn back to Almont Street, a place so alien, yet now holding the most significant pieces of his life. He found Leo sitting on the steps, sketching in a worn notebook with a stub of a pencil. Arthur sat beside him, a careful distance between them. He asked Leo about his drawings, about school, about his friends. Leo, initially shy, began to open up, his youthful enthusiasm a stark contrast to the bleakness of his surroundings. Arthur saw flashes of himself in the boy's quick mind, his intense focus, and glimpses of Eliza in his gentle smile and the kindness in his eyes. Eliza watched them from her doorway, her expression a mixture of wariness and a reluctant, fragile hope. Arthur approached her later, offering financial assistance. "Let me help, Eliza. For Leo. For you." She was proud, her refusal tinged with the bitterness of past hurts. "We manage, Arthur. We always have." But he saw the threadbare curtains in her window, the worn soles of Leo's shoes, the quiet desperation she tried so hard to hide. He couldn't force her, not yet. Instead, he arranged for anonymous deliveries, groceries, art supplies for Leo, a new coat for the coming winter. Small gestures, insufficient to bridge the chasm of years, but a start. Back in his imposing office tower, Arthur summoned Marcus. His voice was cold, devoid of emotion, but Marcus, who had served him for 15 years, recognized the dangerous undercurrent. "Marcus, 10 years ago, when Miss Hayes and I separated, did my sister Victoria ever give you specific instructions regarding communication from Eliza Hayes?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the plush carpet. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken truths. Arthur waited, his patience a thin, taut wire. He had built his empire on reading people, on sensing deception. He knew Marcus was hiding something. "Marcus," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a tone far more menacing than any shout. "The truth." Marcus finally looked up, his face etched with regret. "Sir," he began, his voice low. "Miss Victoria, she was very clear. All calls from a Miss Eliza Hayes were to be logged, but not put through to you. Any letters, any messages, they were to be given directly to her. She said she would handle it, to spare you distress." The betrayal was a physical blow, stealing Arthur's breath. Victoria, his own sister. She hadn't just allowed a misunderstanding. She had actively, cruelly engineered it. She had stolen his son from him, stolen Eliza's chance, stolen a decade of his life. The cold fury that rose in him was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was not the calculated anger of a business rival thwarted, but the raw, primal rage of a father, a lover, betrayed by his own blood. The confirmation of Victoria's treachery ignited a cold fire in Arthur's soul. He understood now the depth of Eliza's pain, the reason for her haunted eyes, the decade of struggle she had endured alone, believing he had abandoned her and their child. He saw Victoria's actions not just as interference, but as a calculated cruelty designed to keep him tethered to the family's ambitions, unencumbered by what she would have deemed an unsuitable alliance. His focus shifted. This was no longer just about uncovering the past. It was about reclaiming his future, his son. He began to spend more deliberate time with Leo. He took him to a park, a simple, sun-dappled green space that to Leo felt like a wonderland. They threw a frisbee, Leo's laughter echoing, a sound that resonated deep within Arthur, thawing parts of him he thought long frozen. He bought Leo an ice cream, a triple scoop that the boy attacked with delighted ferocity. These small, ordinary moments felt extraordinarily precious. Arthur found himself observing Leo with an almost painful intensity, cataloguing every expression, every new word, every shared glance. He was acutely aware of the 9 years he had missed, a vast, irretrievable ocean of time. Eliza watched these interactions with a cautious heart. She saw the genuine affection in Arthur's eyes when he looked at Leo, the patience he showed, the way his stern features softened in their son's presence. Slowly, painstakingly, the walls around her own heart began to show tiny cracks. They started to talk, really talk, in the quiet evenings after Leo was asleep. Arthur didn't make excuses for his absence, but explained the manipulations, the lies he'd been fed. Eliza listened, the pain of her own solitude, her belief in his rejection, still raw. "I came to Blackwood Tower so many times, Arthur," she whispered one evening, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I left messages. I even saw Victoria once. She told me you were moving on, that you'd said I was a mistake you regretted." Arthur closed his eyes, the image of his sister's duplicity making him physically sick. He gently took Eliza's hand, his touch hesitant. "She lied, Eliza. She lied about everything." He offered Eliza a comfortable, secure apartment in a good neighborhood, a place with a small garden for Leo, close to a better school. He also suggested a position for her, leveraging his contacts to find something that would use her dormant artistic talents, something to restore her independence and dignity. She was hesitant, the fear of being hurt again, of becoming dependent, a powerful deterrent. "I don't know, Arthur," she'd said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's all so much, so fast." Meanwhile, word of Arthur's unusual interest in a woman and child from a disadvantaged part of the city inevitably reached Victoria. She called him, her voice oozing insincere concern. "Arthur, darling, I've heard the most peculiar rumors. Are you quite well? You're not getting involved with unsuitable people, are you? You know how easily one can be taken advantage of." Arthur's response was glacial. "My personal life is no longer your concern, Victoria." Her probing questions, her veiled warnings, only solidified his suspicions. She knew, or at least she suspected the truth was unraveling. Victoria, sensing a threat to her carefully curated influence over Arthur, and by extension the family legacy and fortune, felt a familiar coil of panic. This woman from the slums and her child could undo years of her meticulous planning. She couldn't allow it. She made a call to a discreet and decidedly unsavory private investigator she kept on retainer for such delicate situations. "I have a small matter that needs delicate handling," she purred into the phone, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "A mother and child. I need you to make them uncomfortable enough to disappear." Victoria's machinations began subtly at first. Anonymous calls to Eliza at odd hours, silence on the other end, designed to unnerve. Then a series of coincidental mishaps. A dead rat left on her doorstep, Leo's battered soccer ball slashed, graffiti appearing on their apartment door. Eliza, already stretched thin by years of poverty and stress, began to fray. Fear, cold and sharp, became her constant companion. The final blow came when her landlord, a greasy, unpleasant man who had previously been content to take her late rent payments with a shrug, suddenly served her with an eviction notice, citing a string of fabricated violations. He was overtly aggressive, his eyes shifty, Eliza knew with a chilling certainty that this was no coincidence. Leo, sensitive to his mother's distress, grew quiet and withdrawn. The light in his eyes dimmed. He clung to Eliza, his small face pale with worry. "Are we going to be okay, Mommy?" He'd whisper at night, and Eliza would hold him tight, her own terror a suffocating blanket she tried to hide. She considered pushing Arthur away, convinced his reappearance had brought this new wave of trouble. Perhaps they were better off alone, struggling but safe from these shadowy threats. When Arthur next visited, he found Eliza pale and distraught, packing their meager belongings into cardboard boxes. He saw the eviction notice on the rickety table. He didn't need to ask. The fear in her eyes told him everything. "What happened, Eliza?" he asked gently, his voice carefully modulated despite the anger coiling in his gut. She broke then, the carefully constructed dam of her composure giving way to a torrent of tears and terrified words. She told him about the calls, the vandalism, the eviction. "I don't know who it is, Arthur, or why, but ever since you came back—" Arthur listened, his expression hardening with each detail. He had no doubt who was behind this. Victoria. His sister, so consumed by greed and control, was now actively terrorizing the mother of his child, his son. A wave of protective fury, so potent it was almost dizzying, washed over him. This was no longer about past grievances. It was about the present danger to his family. His family. The thought resonated with a surprising, powerful clarity. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "Pack your things, but not to leave. You and Leo are moving. Today." Despite Eliza's initial protests, her fear of being beholden, her ingrained independence warring with her maternal desperation, Arthur was unyielding. He moved them into a spacious, secure apartment he owned in a quiet, respectable part of the city, a world away from Almont Street. It had a sunlit room for Leo, overlooking a small park. He hired discreet security to watch the building. "Let me do this, Eliza," he urged, his gaze intense. "Let me protect our son. Let me protect you. This is my fault for allowing Victoria such influence for so long." Eliza, exhausted and scared, finally nodded, tears of relief and residual fear streaming down her face. Arthur turned to Marcus, who had been waiting silently. His voice was dangerously calm. "Marcus, I want to know everything Victoria is doing. Every call, every meeting, every payment. I want irrefutable proof of her involvement in this harassment. Spare no expense. I want her exposed." He was no longer just a millionaire seeking answers. He was a father, a protector, and he would bring the full weight of his resources to bear against anyone who threatened his son. The battle lines were drawn. Marcus, leveraging Arthur's considerable resources and his own network of contacts, delved into Victoria Blackwood's recent activities. It didn't take long. Victoria, accustomed to operating with impunity, had grown careless. Financial trails led from her personal accounts to a notoriously sleazy private investigator. Phone records showed a flurry of calls between them, coinciding with the incidents of harassment Eliza had described. Marcus even managed to get a sworn, albeit paid-for, affidavit from Eliza's former landlord, admitting he'd been bribed to initiate the eviction. The evidence was damning, a clear portrait of Victoria's malicious campaign. While Marcus worked, Arthur focused on Leo and Eliza. In the safety of their new home, a fragile sense of normalcy began to bloom. Leo, away from the oppressive fear of Almont Street, slowly regained his playful spirit. Arthur found himself rediscovering a lighter side of himself, a side he thought long dead. He helped Leo with his third-grade math homework, marveling at the boy's quick grasp of concepts. He read bedtime stories, his voice, usually reserved for boardroom negotiations, softening as he navigated tales of dragons and brave knights. One evening, as Arthur was tucking him in, Leo looked up, his blue eyes, so like Arthur's own, serious and direct. "Mr. Art," he began, using the nickname he'd coined, Are you my dad?" The question, so simple, so profound, hung in the air. Arthur felt a lump form in his throat. He sat on the edge of the bed, taking Leo's small hand in his. "Yes, Leo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I am your dad." Tears welled in Leo's eyes, and then, to Arthur's surprise, the boy threw his arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. Arthur held his son, a wave of pure, unadulterated love washing over him, healing old scars, filling voids he hadn't even realized were so vast. Eliza, who had been standing in the doorway, watched them, her own eyes shining. Later, when Leo was asleep, she and Arthur talked, the barriers between them continuing to crumble. He formally apologized, not just for his absence, but for the pain his family, his sister, had inflicted. "I should have been stronger, Eliza. I should have questioned what I was told. I failed you both." Eliza reached out, her fingers lightly touching his arm. "Victoria is the one who failed, Arthur. She let bitterness and greed twist her. We were just casualties of her choices." Forgiveness, tentative but real, began to bridge the chasm between them. Arthur learned more about Leo's early years, his quiet bravery in the face of hardship, his innate kindness, his small, simple dreams of having a dog or visiting the ocean. Each story was a fresh stab of regret for the time lost, but also a fierce resolve to make every future moment count. He saw the intelligence in Leo, the potential that had been stifled by circumstance. He vowed to give his son every opportunity, not of wealth, but of experience, of learning, of joy. Victoria, however, was not one to retreat. Learning that Eliza and Leo were now ensconced in one of Arthur's properties, clearly under his protection, sent her into a controlled fury. Her initial attempts at intimidation had failed. She needed a more direct, more public method to discredit Eliza and reassert her control over Arthur. She decided to host an impromptu family reconciliation dinner at the Blackwood estate, insisting Arthur attend, and with a voice dripping with false magnanimity, that he bring Eliza and the boy. It was, she intimated, a chance for everyone to clear the air. Arthur knew it was a trap. Victoria wasn't interested in reconciliation. She was interested in humiliation, in a public showdown where she could paint Eliza as a scheming opportunist. Arthur, however, was no longer the emotionally blind man Victoria had manipulated for years. He saw her ploy for what it was, a desperate high-stakes gamble. "An excellent idea, Victoria," he'd said coolly over the phone, the hidden meaning in his tone entirely lost on his sister, who preened at her apparent success. "Eliza, Leo and I would be delighted to attend your dinner." He hung up, a grim determination settling over him. He instructed Marcus to have copies of all the evidence, bank statements, recordings of the PI, the landlord's affidavit, prepared and ready. He would not just defend Eliza, he would expose Victoria. The evening of the dinner arrived, cloaked in an atmosphere of forced civility and underlying tension. The Blackwood estate, a sprawling mansion filled with cold antiques and even colder family portraits, felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Victoria, dressed in a severe, expensive gown, greeted them at the door, her smile a predatory slash of red lipstick. She was overly solicitous to Arthur, icily polite to Eliza, and almost entirely ignored Leo, who instinctively pressed closer to Arthur's side, his small hand gripping his father's. The other attendees were a curated selection of influential family members and a few of Victoria's society sycophants, all eager for a whiff of scandal. Dinner was an ordeal. Victoria steered the conversation, peppering it with thinly veiled insults directed at Eliza. snide remarks about her humble background, pointed questions about her sudden reappearance in Arthur's life. Eliza bore it with quiet dignity, her composure a stark contrast to Victoria's barely concealed malice. Arthur remained largely silent, observing, waiting. Leo, sensing the undercurrents of hostility, ate little, his eyes wide and anxious. Finally, as coffee was served, Victoria made her move. She stood, tapping her crystal glass for attention. "Dear family, friends," she began, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "As you know, Arthur has always been generous, and some, it seems, are all too willing to take advantage of that generosity." She gestured vaguely towards Eliza. "It has come to my attention that this woman, Miss Hayes, has made certain claims of a past connection, claims involving a child, clearly designed to insinuate herself into Arthur's life, and, of course, his fortune." The room fell silent, all eyes on Eliza, who paled but met Victoria's gaze steadily. Before Victoria could continue her venomous diatribe, Arthur rose slowly from his chair. His presence, usually formidable, now seemed to crackle with a dangerous energy. "That's quite enough, Victoria," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable authority that cut through the room. "You speak of claims and opportunism. Let's talk about truth. Let's talk about deceit." He signaled to Marcus, who stepped forward and began distributing folders to the stunned guests. "For 10 years, Arthur continued, his voice gaining strength, his gaze sweeping over the shocked faces, "I believed Eliza Hayes left me willingly. I believed she wanted no contact. That was a lie orchestrated by my own sister." Gasps rippled through the room. Victoria's face went white. "Arthur, this is outrageous. She's poisoned you against me." "Has she?" Arthur countered, holding up a bank statement. "Or is it this, Victoria? A payment to a private investigator known for his unsavory tactics. An investigator who, coincidentally, began harassing Eliza and my son, Leo, shortly after I reconnected with them. Or perhaps this sworn statement from Eliza's landlord, admitting you paid him to evict a single mother and her child." He laid out the evidence, piece by damning piece, the phone logs, the timeline of intimidation. Victoria's carefully constructed facade of propriety and concern shattered, revealing the ugly, grasping ambition beneath. "Leo is my son, Victoria," Arthur declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "And Eliza is the woman I loved, the woman you systematically drove away with your lies and your cruelty. You didn't just interfere, you actively sought to destroy her, to keep my son from me, all to maintain your perceived control over the family and its assets." He paused, then delivered the final blow. "And for that reason, effective immediately, I am amending my will. Leo will be my primary heir, and you, Victoria, will receive nothing." Victoria stared, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Exposed, defeated, her schemes in ruins, she lost all control. With a primal scream of rage, she lunged towards Eliza, her hands clawed. You did this, you little tramp." Before she could reach her, 2 discreet security guards whom Arthur had presciently hired and stationed nearby stepped in, firmly restraining the struggling, shrieking Victoria. The opulent dining room descended into chaos. Victoria, thrashing and screaming invectives, was unceremoniously escorted from the mansion, her furious cries echoing in the marble hallways before fading into a shocked silence. The remaining guests, a mixture of horrified family members and stunned associates, avoided Arthur's gaze, some muttering embarrassed apologies, others simply slinking away, eager to distance themselves from the implosion of the Blackwood dynasty's carefully polished image. Arthur, weary but resolute, took Eliza's hand and gently guided a wide-eyed Leo towards the exit, Marcus trailing discreetly behind. In the calm sanctuary of the car, the silence was thick. Leo, nestled between Arthur and Eliza, finally broke it, his small voice uncertain. Is Aunt Victoria a very bad person, Daddy?" Arthur looked at his son, at the innocent confusion in his eyes. How to explain such adult malice to a child? "Sometimes, Leo," Arthur said carefully, "people get scared. Scared of losing things, scared of not being important. And that fear can make them do very bad, very cruel things. Aunt Victoria made some terrible choices." Eliza squeezed Leo's other hand, her touch reassuring. "But we're okay, sweetie. We're all okay now." She looked at Arthur, a profound gratitude in her eyes that spoke more than words. The truth, however painful its unearthing, was finally out. The following days were a whirlwind of legal and personal adjustments. Arthur, true to his word, formally disassociated himself from Victoria in all business and family matters. He instructed his lawyers to ensure she had no further access to company funds or influence. The news of her public disgrace and subsequent ostracization rippled through their social circles. A cautionary tale of ambition curdled into malice. For Arthur, Eliza, and Leo, life began to find a new rhythm. Arthur, shedding the shackles of his sister's decade-long manipulation, focused on what truly mattered. He moved Eliza and Leo into a warm, welcoming house he owned in a leafy suburb, a place with a large garden and rooms filled with sunlight, a stark contrast to the cold grandeur of the Blackwood estate and the grimness of Almont Street. He revelled in the simple acts of fatherhood he had been denied for so long. He attended Leo's school plays, his chest swelling with a pride far greater than any corporate acquisition. He taught Leo to ride a bicycle in the park, his laughter mingling with his son's squeals of delight. He was there for scraped knees and bedtime stories, for discussions about dinosaurs and dreams of becoming an astronaut. Eliza, too, began to flourish. With Arthur's encouragement and support, she started a small online boutique, showcasing her delicate botanical illustrations, a passion she had long suppressed. Her confidence returned, her eyes regaining their youthful sparkle, the lines of worry slowly softening. The ring, the phoenix, remained a potent symbol. Leo, understanding its history now, still wore it on its leather cord, a tangible link to his parents' past and their reunited present. Sometimes he would take it off at night and place it on his bedside table, a silent acknowledgement of its preciousness. Arthur, watching Eliza and Leo one sunny afternoon as they planted flowers in their new garden, their faces alight with shared joy, felt a warmth spread through him, a profound contentment that all his billions had never been able to buy. He was finally home, not in a place, but in a feeling, in the love of his found family. The emptiness that had haunted him for a decade was filled, replaced by a quiet, steady happiness. He realized with a clarity that was almost startling that he was no longer just Arthur Blackwood, the ruthless millionaire. He was Arthur, Eliza's partner, Leo's father, and that was the only title that truly mattered. The transformation in Arthur Blackwood was profound and palpable. The icy reserve that had once defined him melted away, replaced by a warmth and approachability that surprised his colleagues and employees. He delegated more at Blackwood Industries, entrusting capable executives with day-to-day operations. His priorities irrevocably shifted. He still attended crucial meetings, his mind as sharp as ever. But now there was a different light in his eyes, an empathy that had been absent before. His office, once a sterile monument to power, now featured a small, slightly chaotic corner filled with Leo's colorful drawings and a framed photograph of Eliza and Leo laughing, their faces bright with joy. His true wealth, he now understood, wasn't in stock portfolios or offshore accounts, but in the shared laughter that filled his home, in the trusting hand of his son slipped into his, in the quiet moments of companionship with Eliza. Their life settled into a comfortable, loving routine. Weekends were for pancake breakfasts, trips to the zoo or the science museum, and evenings spent reading or playing board games. Arthur discovered a surprising aptitude for building elaborate Lego castles, and an even more surprising tolerance for Leo's off-key singing. He watched, with a father's quiet pride, as Leo blossomed in his new school, making friends easily, his natural intelligence and curiosity finally given the space to flourish. Eliza, her artistic talent reawakened, found success with her online boutique. Her illustrations, once a private solace, now brought joy to others, and with it, a renewed sense of purpose and independence. She and Arthur navigated their rekindled relationship with a mature understanding, their shared past a foundation for a future built on honesty and mutual respect. The shadow of Victoria Blackwood lingered only as a distant, cautionary memory. She was isolated, her social standing ruined, her financial access curtailed. She became a non-entity in their lives, her power to inflict pain neutralized by the truth. Arthur, wanting something positive to emerge from the years of deceit, established the Phoenix Foundation in Leo's name, a charity dedicated to providing educational and artistic opportunities for underprivileged children in the city, ensuring that other bright sparks like his son wouldn't have their potential dimmed by circumstance. One cool autumn evening, Arthur sat by Leo's bedside, the boy fast asleep, his face peaceful in the soft glow of the nightlight. The phoenix ring lay on the bedside table, its white gold gleaming faintly. Arthur picked it up, the cool metal familiar in his palm. It was a symbol of so much, of lost love, of painful separation, of deceit, but ultimately of reunion and unbreakable bonds. He walked quietly into the living room where Eliza was sketching by the fireplace, a soft smile playing on her lips. She looked up as he entered, her eyes meeting his, full of a deep, unwavering affection. He didn't need to speak. The quiet contentment that enveloped them was a language all its own. He sat beside her, taking her hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. He thought of the grinding despair of his Lamborghini breaking down on Almont Street, the grimy little boy with the startlingly familiar eyes, and the glint of a ring that had unraveled a decade of lies and led him, improbably, miraculously, to this moment of profound peace. He was no longer just a millionaire. He was a man made whole. He leaned over and kissed Eliza softly, a promise of all the quiet, ordinary, wonderful tomorrows that lay ahead for their family.